the sense that, yes, so if you say something naughty, then we will pass that through all the other persons that will later look at this. That is what, from the point of view of the instructions or the general rules of courtesy, I need to share with you. And then we go to the program of this evening, ladies and gentlemen. So Nina, can I ask you to move? Yes, very good. So we are already in the welcome part of it, and I will also guide you through the evening and introduce the speakers. I also have a very short introduction into the subject of digitalization and COVID-19. And then we move on to our let's say, expert speakers. Although the first one is Rob de Smet from Amsterdam, the Onze Lieve Vrouwen Gasthuis. And he is one of the persons that have worked on the Corona check. And he's doing that from his capacity as a head of the electronic patient record division of that hospital. And then as a second speaker, there will be Maurits Kaptein, JADS professor as we call it, and he will speak about computational personalization. So that as an introduction, ladies and gentlemen. So now we would like to move on to the short introduction to the subject. And in the next slide, here we have the speakers again. The first thing I would like to recall is that from the point of view of developing apps, we distinguish generally two broad classes of apps. The first one is the apps that trace symptoms, so that should give an answer to the question, does a person have the coronavirus or not? And then the second class of apps is the one that we can apply to trace the contacts of the persons, to signal others that have been close to this person in terms of space in an early phase to go into quarantine. So in the next slide, we see that already very recently we have publications in this domain. I would like to mention the names of Luca Ferretti and Chris Wyman, who are leading experts in the world. And just some 2 weeks ago, they published this article that I will be using as a source in the small introduction in the let's say, very famous journal called Science. It's from March 31 this year. And there is also the pointer, and that is available to you also later to look it up. So what did Ferretti and Wyman publish? So they argue, and that is shown in the next slide, that it makes sense to track and trace persons in the following sense. So whenever persons would download an app, and for instance, we have a subject A that hypothetically has a COVID-19 infections, but doesn't know it from himself because he doesn't have any symptoms. So this person lives at home with the persons in his family. He uses the public transportation, a train. Then he goes to work, and there he meets with persons very close, but also others that are slightly more remote. And then he returns home, and that's the daily way of working. Maybe he goes to the gym or does some other things that can be added. And then at some point in time, he awakes and has a fever. So he reports the symptoms, and then he's called for a test, and then there is a positive outcome, or, well, depending on the way he feels it, it also can be negative. But positive means that he has the COVID-19 virus. And then the app instantly signals to all the persons that have been traced over the 14 days in the past that the person, that subject A, has an infection. So then the question is, what can we do with this? And the next slide is a very interesting slide because it shows that indeed this can be used in a positive way. So what we see here is the so-called quantification of intervention success. It's a heat map. So as a result of, let's say, the track and tracing on the horizontal axis in terms of the isolating cases, and the vertical axis in terms of quarantine. So 90% means that 90% of the people who apply this app do it in a positive way, and that 19% of the persons who get a signal that they should go into quarantine, that they are doing this, that they follow this suggestion. Then even after 48 hours, you can see that it still reduces the reproduction rate, as we call it. And whenever we do this faster, so 4 hours after the subject A has been positively identified, the rate of success is even higher. And of course, if it is done instantly, it's also higher. So the message of this slide is that there is a positive success that can be gained from this type of apps, if the number of persons that apply it is large enough, and if the number of persons that adhere to it is also large, sufficiently large. So then the question is, would people subscribe to an approach like this? And there we have results from another source. And we see that in the next slide is work from Johannes Abeler and team from Oxford University. So they did a big survey over the past months in the UK, Germany, Italy, and France, and the US. And they asked the persons, how likely would you be to install or not install the app on your phone? And the dark green numbers in the percentages indicate that they definitely would like to do this. And the dark red percentages indicate that they wouldn't be doing this. So this means that approximately somewhere between 50 and 80% of the persons that are asked to respond would respond positively. In the next slide, then we see the compliance with the app recommendation. So that is the second part of the success rate. So whenever you get an advice to go into quarantine, would you do this? And here you see that even the responses are higher. So the number of people that give a positive response to the adherence question is somewhere between 75 and 90%. So that indicates that this type of app could be very successfully applied. And then in the next slide, we see the results of the responses whenever persons who are in the red domain, so they would not like to do this, what reasons they provide for this. And one of the first reasons, so that's 42% of the persons respond that they wouldn't trust government, that they would not, let's say, continue the surveillance after the academic has passed. So this is quite an interesting insight. Then there is another large group that says, well, screw the heck, my phone might get hacked. And there is also a group that says, well, if I have an app like this on the phone, then I get anxious because I will most likely panic whenever there is this positive recommendation to go in quarantine. And so these are three indications that make a lot of sense whenever there would be a rollout of this type of application. So this as a short introduction. And as I already said, the question is whether or not we can take away the fear. And then is this in this final slide, you see that big companies like Google and Apple have already announced a safe Bluetooth technology that they could download on their own on their devices that use crypto keys, as it is called. So that means that whenever the vicinity is recorded, that the two phones only exchange keys. And then whenever there is a positive identification of COVID with a person, what happens then is that the keys of that person are uploaded to the cloud, and from there the other persons are being signaled. And so from this, and that is already known for quite a long time, so through this crypto keys, you can, in an anonymous way and in the tampering safe way, have this app and its communication through a large amount of persons. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is just a short introduction into the part of the tracing apps. And then the next presentation, and that is, or I should say that both presentations that we are going to listen to now, they have to deal with this other part of the apps, and that is the symptom tracking and tracing. So what does it take to get a negative or positive outcome of a test in a very, very early phase? So the first speaker, I have already announced him, is Rob de Smet from the Onze Lieve Vrouwengasthuis. And I would like now to invite Rob to come to the stage and give us, share his insight with us. And it will definitely be an interesting presentation. So please, Rob, go ahead.
Thank you, Emil. Welcome everyone to this kind of weird way of giving a presentation, I must say. Like Emil said, I'm Rob de Smet. I work at the OLVG Hospital as one of the managers of the electronic medical record department. And typically, an EMR was always like focused inwards towards the hospital. So you had a lot of patient data there. We didn't really do anything with it outside the hospital. Nowadays, though, we have patient portals, we have more apps, etc. So we're doing that more and more. And with that knowledge, I was asked to participate in the Corona Check app. And one other thing I do is I also participate in the JADS Data Science and Healthcare program, because I think data could be a very big asset to healthcare, and we're not really using it in a really effective way. And the JADS program is really helping me to get more insights in that. What I'm going to talk about in the next couple of minutes is what the Corona Check exactly is, how it works, why we made it, where we are now, and what are the next steps, what we think we can achieve with the app. So what is it? The Corona Check app is a virtual guidance tool. Like was just said, it's not a contact tracing app. It's developed to help people who think they might have corona, who feel sick, who are scared maybe, to get care in an easy way. And it was made in response to the outbreak of COVID-19 to keep healthcare accessible. It was just before the lockdown that the board of directors, the head of the board of directors was talking with the owner of LUSCII. And LUSCII is a company based in Amsterdam that makes innovative solutions in healthcare. And basically what they do, they provide people with medical devices and an app. And that app helps them and enables the caregiver to monitor the patient from home. And it was really good that the app was already developed, because basically what we had to do was create building blocks inside the app to make this Corona Check. And we decided to do that because we really thought with the COVID-19 outbreak, healthcare will be flooded with people who have questions. And in our opinion, GPs and hospitals would really struggle to help all these people. So we thought maybe we can develop a way to make it easy for people with these questions. So like I said, it's not a contact tracing app, and it's also not a replacement for regular care. So how does the app work then? Basically, what the app does is every day you get a reminder. And the reminder just asks you to fill in answer 5 questions on COVID-19 related symptoms. Those include sore throat, nasal cold, coughing, shortness of breath, and temperature. Some of them are just basically yes or no questions. So we have a sore throat, we have a cold. Other ones are ranked on a 0 to 10 scale. So shortness of breath, 0 means you have no trouble, and 10 means you really have trouble breathing, even if you're not doing anything, basically. All these measurements are stored in the app, and you can see them over time. So you can see over time how to develop, if your shortness of breath is increasing or decreasing. And also the app gives you some information about the COVID-19. All this information comes from the RIVM or other sources that we think are useful in this case. So once you've given the measurements in the app, it goes to the next phase. And it's on the next slide. All the measurements are all the measurements are in a protocol. And basically what the protocol does, it assesses the measurements and then sees if anything is wrong or not. If there's nothing wrong, you will just get a message saying, you seem okay, nothing to worry about, please fill in the things again tomorrow. But if there is reason to look into it more, all the information is sent to a medical team. And this medical team, those can be GPs, doctors, trained nurses, and they assess the measurements, and if needed, they contact the user by phone. They would ask additional questions, and based on that, they can give personalized advice to the user. In certain cases, people will be referred to their GPs or the caregivers when, based on the phone call, the caregivers think it's needed. And I think what's really good about this app, and this is on the next slide, is it helps people really in these times when there's a lot of fear to cope with the COVID-19 virus. And I think one of the greatest compliments we got is in the middle, a tweet that really says this app is a really human way of using an app, because it's very easy to fill in a few things, but then if there's something wrong or you're worrying and you get someone on the phone to just have a chat with, and then based on that you know how you're doing and what's going to happen, you don't really have to worry. That's a huge thing. On the right side, there's an interview with Jelle. He works in one of the Corona call centers, and he basically says the whole day, I'm just putting people at ease and making sure that they know what's happening. On the left side, if you want to know more about this team, on the OLVG website, there are a few little clips about a few people who work in this center. It's nice to check out if you want to know more about it. So where are we now? Since Tuesday, the app is nationwide available. 4 weeks ago, we started just in the Amsterdam region, and since then we've expanded it, and since Tuesday, we cover the whole country. There are 7 centers now with medical personnel across the country. Some of them are filled with staff from the hospital, but in Utrecht, for example, GPs from the region are in the medical team and handling all the calls. We have more than 140,000 active users at the moment, and it's increasing quite rapidly. And in the Amsterdam area, more than 3,000 of the users of the app showed corona-related symptoms. We can't say really that they have corona because we're not testing them, we're not giving them the test yet, but based on the symptoms they've reported, we are pretty sure that they have corona. The app, underneath, there's a lot of hospitals and other healthcare organizations. They're all supporting and promoting the app now. On the right side, there are a few of the supporters of the app, and there are basically other organizations who think this app really helps their employers to in this corona crisis. So they're also saying to their employees, please use this app. So what are we going to do in the next couple of weeks? We're going to start a small pilot with OLVG employees who are using the app and who are reporting corona-related symptoms, and we're going to test them for corona. And if they do have the coronavirus or are corona-19 positive, COVID-19, then we'll be giving them an oxygen saturation device, and they will be monitored from home. Every day we get more data from that, and a physician will do a video call with these employees as well to really help them when they are COVID-19 positive. And with this pilot, we want to see if we can even help people who have COVID in a better way. And it also helps us to assess if the assumption that people have COVID-19 based on the measurements they're provided is true by really testing them for COVID-19. So this is exciting. I'm not sure what we'll find out in this next phase, but I think it could be an interesting addition to what we're already doing. So yeah, this is in a nutshell what the app is and what we've done in the last 4 weeks.
All right, thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we now have the opportunity to pose questions. I will explain once more the procedure for this. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, there is this pop-up that says participants. If you click on that, you see that there are a number of possibilities, and one of them is raise your hand. If you click on that, there will be a blue hand appearing in the screen, and that hand will then transfer to us, and we will put you in the queue to sequence the question posers. And maybe Rob, to warm up a little, and then in the meantime the ladies can arrange for the sequence. Of course, in the past 1 and 2 weeks we had this let's say the thing going on in the Netherlands. The Minister De Jong of the Ministry of Health and Well-being and Sports, he announced that there was going to be a hackathon that took place last week. So can you briefly comment on this and also tell us how your app fits into this approach?
Well, I don't think it really fits into the approach that was chosen there, because what I've seen from all the apps, it basically started from scratch developing an app, while this app was already there. Like the basic thing was there, we just had to fill it with content, and that was still a lot of work, and it's not as easy as as I'm saying it now. So it was a whole different thing, and I think what you need for an app like what they're looking for with the contact tracing is something that's really safe and applies all the privacy rules right. And I'm not sure if in such a short time you can really do that. Yeah,
it's a good point. It's a good point. Maybe we can get back to this later, because I do see a hand from Huip Hezemans. Huip, please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening. Hello, Rob. Nice to see you presenting. I had a question. Do you know if the LUSCII app is classified as a medical device? And if not, why not?
I think it is actually, yes. But I'm not 100% sure because I don't work for LUSCII, but I think it is, yeah.
Okay, but you haven't been involved in checking this requirement of this app?
No, I haven't, but I have been looking on the website, and it's an ISO certified app, so I think it is.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Do we have more questions, Nina?
Emil, at this point, we do not have any other questions. Oh, well, just one from Egge.
Yeah, the one and only Egge. Egge, go ahead.
Yeah, Rob, of course, very nice to see you. It's fascinating what you accomplished in such a short time period. I was wondering, you started off by saying the goal of the app and of your team was to prevent a flood of patients coming to the hospital and to the GPs. In your assessment, how did you manage to do that?
Well, I think by making it really easy, if you have questions, to use the app and get a quick response in case you need it. That means that you don't have to go to your GP or the hospital for those things. But I'm not sure of the app in the end. Like, it's hard to tell if it really stopped the flooding of the GP or the hospital, of course.
Good, good. Can you hear me still or not?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, Egge.
Because maybe then Maurits can say something about it, because I think this is the main question to answer when scaling up such an app.
Yeah, let me step in there. So I was also just checking the previous question. It is indeed a certified medical device. I was just confirmed. So that's the case. You were asking about how would you actually demonstrate, in a sense, the effectiveness of whether or not this actually like helps in relieving the burden on the healthcare system. Is that kind of a correct way of phrasing it?
Yes.
Yeah. So this, I think, is one. I mean, this is one of the purposes of the app, I would say, and you can find like many ways of evaluating this app. But this one is especially, I would say, methodologically very challenging and tricky, because in a sense you would like to maybe compare to regions where an app like this is not deployed, but we have a kind of a different progression of the disease in many places. You might think, and this is definitely something we have been discussing, whether or not you could just compare effectively how much requests are being made to like general practitioners, for example. If you cover like a group of say 10,000 people, and now like how much effort is needed to cover 10,000 people in the app, that also I think is a kind of an unfair comparison in the following sense. As Rob was saying, a lot of people feel kind of comforted by the app. These might be people that normally would not necessarily seek like professional help, but still the app is a relief to them. So despite the fact that it's a super sensible and kind of in a sense one of the core questions, I think it's quite hard to evaluate it properly. And right now, I think it's somewhat unclear how to do that at this scale, because in a sense the app wasn't rolled out as a randomized controlled trial, for example. So the app was rolled out in some ways in this kind of impeding crisis, and because of the prior success of the similar app, basically, as Rob was saying, this is built on an existing app. I think it was kind of immediately adopted, but it hasn't been rolled out in a way where it's super easy to then kind of compare the app with the app-less situation, so to say. And this is a methodological challenge. So if anyone has any ideas on how to do this potentially, or I would say probably with data that is not just data from the app itself, I think that's a very interesting kind of avenue of future work.
Thank you very much, Maurits. We will get back to you later.
Maybe we have one more question.
Yes, I see it. From,
okay, great.
Yeah, from Albert Sala. Let me quickly check if that is so. Yeah, Albert Sala from the University of Utrecht. Albert, please go ahead.
Thank you. I have two quick questions. One of them is when it comes to mobile apps, children create a data gap because they're usually they don't own a phone line. Is there something that kind of addresses this? Because I think in May, primary schools are going to be open. So maybe there is also a need for kids to check this. This is my first question. And the second question is, of course, this app will provide a lot of data about individual places connected with symptoms, and it can be used to see the spread and progression of the disease. And is there something that allows the users to share extensive data, maybe including demographics and locations and traces, with the authorities?
The first question, the app now is only available for children, for adults, so 18 and above. I'm not sure if we're gonna also make the app available for people under 18, because you have different legal rules for those kind of patients, so we have to look into that. And for the second question, what was the question again?
The question is, if we want to, if the government wants to collect data, let's say in an extensive way through this application, is there a way that the users can allow the app to share the data with the government, and what would be the extent of that?
No, they can't at the moment. We only have a very minimal amount of data on the patient anyway, and we have there's no way of sharing that with the government. No.
Well, thank you very much, Albert and Rob. Given time, I think we would like to move on. Thank you, Rob, for this, for sharing with us your views on this very exciting development, and good luck with it in the near future and the days to come.
Thank you.
Then, ladies and gentlemen, we already have listened to him and had an opportunity to look at him, Maurits Kaptein, one of our JADS professors with a strong background in data science, and now one of the leading experts in our data and health program. He's involved in many projects. He runs a kind of computational personalization lab, and he's going to give us some insights in this development, and then also in some particular aspects of handling data and to, let's say, tailor them to certain user needs. So, Maurits, please go ahead. Maurits, you have to unmute.
Unmute. Does that
yes,
work?
we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Sorry about that. I was doing this super exciting, like, oh, it's great to see all of you bit. So, but that's still true. It's great to
Before
see.
You start, Maurits,
yeah.
Can we have the present? Yes.
There we go.
That was you. Well, now you are 100%
now
with us.
100% up and running. No, it's good. It's nice to see everyone and loads of people that we would normally see on kind of in the chapel on days like this. Please do like raise your hands or ask questions. I'm just gonna give a very short talk. I was being asked to talk about like our role in a sense as data scientists in this corona crisis. Are there things we're doing? And kind of from my own background, where I work, as Emil was saying, with the Computational Personalization Lab, there's a bunch of obvious links that we explored. So I just want to talk about some of the recent projects that we've been involved in, and primarily also just open up the discussion. So what I'm going to talk about a bit is the type of stuff we do with the lab. That's going to be very short. Then a quick reflection on, I would say, the very large set of data initiatives that's out there that is covering in one way or another this crisis, which is in some ways a treasure trove to data scientists. Although I would say it's also something that is actually very hard to work with in a meaningful way. So I would argue throughout this talk that if you want to use these types of data sets, even if they're open and public data sets, please like understand how they were collected, what the actual setting was, because this remains a very challenging topic in many of these studies, I would say. Then I'll also talk a bit about the LUSCII OLVG app that Rob kind of introduced from, I would say, from the functional side. But pretty much the week the app was released, I was approached by one of the people at LUSCII to think about how, next to using this data or next to using the app kind of in the real world healthcare process, whether this data would be useful at all and whether there's any ways we could use this data kind of for the common good as an addition to just actually using the functions of the app, so to say. So I'll talk a bit about what we did in that regard and where we are now. Just gonna move on. So the lab that I run effectively consists of 9 PhD students and 1 postdoc, and we work on various health and data related topics. So one of the bigger projects we're running is a big investigation into the effectiveness of different e-health applications. So you can see how there's a bunch of links there. But we also have a lot of way more, I would say, theoretical or methodological projects. So we work on causal inference, trying to find out what is driving and what are the drivers of different effects. We work on treatment personalization, also from a very methodological point of view, decision-making in clinical trials. So there's a large kind of body of different projects that all relate to data science and health in some ways. But on the other hand, and this is what I want to show with 2 very specific projects, most of them are very data science oriented still and very methods oriented still. And then you get to projects that are like this. So a project like this, I'll start with the one on the right side, is a very recent project that we did where we worked on what are called Bayesian additive regression tree models. So those are very flexible supervised learning models. They've been around, I guess, for over a decade, but we've been developing new ways of estimating these models. Now, these models itself are super useful in many applications if you're trying to predict the outcome of a treatment for a specific person. Why? Because they very easily model higher order interactions. But our work was not in this case on a very specific application, but is rather on the computational properties of this model and how do we actually speed up fitting this model kind of in general terms. So despite the fact that we're inspired by these healthcare applications, a lot of our work focuses on methodological and computational applications. Now, the project on the left, which looks very similar because it's also a tree, is actually a project that's much more geared towards the practice or towards application. And this is a project where, based on registry data, so that's data that's being collected in the healthcare process, we're trying to estimate what would be the best treatment, and this is whether or not to administer chemotherapy for colon cancer patients. And there we're trying to derive rules, and what you see on the left-hand side is a decision tree trying to kind of classify for which patient we should treat or we should not treat. So control is the not treat C, and T is actually use the chemotherapy. And I'm showcasing this latter project primarily because over the last, I would say, 2 years that this project has been running, one of the things that I've definitely learned is when I moved, in a sense, from doing only methodological work to doing more applications in healthcare, how extremely important it is to actually understand, for example, the disease that you're working on and how exactly this data was collected and who is putting this data into this registry and why, and which rules changed over the 10 years that this data was collected. There's so many methodological issues with this data that effectively made that we could only do useful work. So some of them are probably here. Lingy is here, Erik might be here, but Hans de Wild and Henk Verheul were co-authors here as well, two medical oncologists that actually helped support doing the analysis of this data, and people from IKNL, which is a Dutch cancer registry. And I think only together we were able to do useful work in this project. And that brings me kind of as a link to some of the data that's now being shared on the COVID or the Corona crisis that we're facing. And there's admittedly a bunch of super cool projects here. And Ege was just asking a question. Ege is involved in this project that's also in part done by Soda, who originated from JADS. So they're actually sharing a bunch and making visually very appealing and providing insights to a lot of data of what's happening with the COVID epidemic in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, we also have the RIVM, the Dutch healthcare, sharing publicly all of their data. So that's the first link. But also, if you browse around, there's various data sources. Like Italy has a lot of open data. Even a bunch of Chinese data sets are open. So in a sense, there's loads and loads of data sets. And then we have like all of these, all the members of my lab, for example, that have worked on loads of methodological things. Can we do useful things with this data set? And I think what I primarily want to do in the remainder of the talk is kind of think about how to match the two for a very specific case. And that specific case happens to be this OLVG Corona app that Rob just introduced again from a functional point of view. But we started thinking about how do we actually use this data for society? Like how do we derive like value from this data? And we actually spent quite some time also discussing the types of questions. For example, the question that Ege was just asking, like how would you use the data that's originating from this app to evaluate whether it's actually succeeding in kind of relieving the healthcare burden? And loads of these questions passed in our discussions. And on one hand, I think we have an amazingly interesting data set of longitudinal data tracking symptoms of people with automatic classification and all the human follow-up that Rob was already describing. This app is extremely often used. People are very happy using it. So we have loads and loads of repeated measures of all of these people, and it's heavily scaling up at this moment in time. So it's over 140,000 people. But on the other hand, there's also a lot of very tricky things in this data set. So for once, it's all self-selection. So people decide to join in filling in their measures. They might only fill in the measures when they feel ill. It might be extremely worried people that actually download the app. It might be people that have been in contact with suspected cases that download the app. So there's all of this self-selection bias. Then there's no real golden standard. Well, that's something that now people are trying to build up, as Rob was saying. But in a sense, the verdict that somebody has corona through the app, that's not being tested through any other like test. It's only because of the measurements people supply themselves. And as we discussed already, estimating the actual causal effects of using this app as opposed to not using this app, because that's actually what you would be interested in, on the healthcare system as a whole, all of this is extremely challenging. And we also in the lab don't have very specific kind of knowledge on the spread of diseases. So that's a topic that none of us has really covered. So we really struggled with thinking about how do we make this data useful. And then actually what we ended up doing together with LUSCII and together with the OLVG is trying to make sure that this data can be shared. So that it's not just us in a way struggling with how to make use of this data, but can we enable other people to use this data set? And what we did as a lab was try to contribute to making that move, to making the data publicly available by actually providing and writing down a pretty extensive protocol. So here you would kind of see described in a way that's not like in a functional way, but in a methodological way, exactly what happened throughout the lifetime of this app. Which variables are being measured? How often are they being measured? How did people sign up? How do people drop out? Kind of as the method section of an academic paper, how was this data collected? So that's where we're trying to add to make sure that this data set is as useful as possible. And by the time people actually start using it, they actually know what they're using. So right now, you can actually apply for this data set, and there is this document that's kind of the method section of your paper, in a sense, that you might be writing on this data set if you start using it. Although, admittedly, and I'm gonna just skip to that, we do have some challenges, because once, like, I guess it's 3 or 4 weeks ago when we decided, yes, we wanna share this, and everybody was, you know, super excited about doing this, the people from LUSCII, the people from OLVG, well, then a few things happened. One is that, you know, the Corona crisis still happened. So for the people from the OLVG, obviously they were really busy kind of just taking care of the regular healthcare process. The LUSCII people, in a sense, were also really busy scaling up the app from the 10,000 people that started to the 140, 150 that are there now. And we ended up being quite busy, on one hand, evaluating some of the applications, but on the other hand, evaluating the whole setup with an ethical committee, going to the Autoriteit Persoonsgegevens, effectively making sure that everything is covered, that once we start opening up this data, actually we have properly protected our participants and all of the regulations and the ethical board things are in place. And right now we're open to these applications, and we're actually, as far as I just received, a text message, we're past all of the legal and ethical kind of checks, so we're able to share this data. I'm just gonna stop over there and see if there's any questions.
Okay, so let's, I see that there is already a hand raised by a person called Frank. So Frank, can you hear me? If that is the case, please raise your hand again and pose your question.
Yes, thank you, Maurits. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, a bit distant, perfect. But I can hear you, yeah.
All right, so I had a question about the self-selection bias. Mm-hmm. Do you think this still will be a problem when it's mass adopted and like it's now nationwide spread and introduced, and will this self-selection bias still be a problem when, yeah, the hundreds of thousands of people will use it later on?
Well, in one extreme, theoretically, like if everybody in the Netherlands is using it, obviously it's not a problem anymore. But right now, it is available for all of the Netherlands, although that's only since yesterday. And there's 140,000 people that are using it. So we're in a sense also missing millions of people. And that might be just because people are not familiar. I mean, it's still like every time this hits like the local news or nu.nl, I think covered it yesterday as well. There's a bunch of new people there. So it might just be familiarity, but it might also very well be driven by characteristics of the people that are participating. And this, I think it's it's going to be just something that's hard to assess whether that's the case. And even more so, it's going to be hard to assess what the actual effects of that are, and if that is a problem or not. So to me, it's just one of the many methodological issues that any real world data set will have that are good to like be aware of and be considerate about, and they might affect specific questions that you're asking. But it's not something that I think easily goes away. Even if you would have 1 million people, those might be a weird 1 million people still, theoretically.
Are there other questions?
Yes, Jack and Sven have questions.
Okay. Jack, can we give you the floor?
Yes. Great talk, Maurits, and also I enjoyed the previous talk much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, somewhere in the app, a decision must be made. Yes, there's a risk you have corona. No, you're safe. In the ideal case, that's 100% perfect. Of course, that can't be the case. So, yeah, can you reflect a little bit on how to set a threshold or how to make the decisions, given all the uncertainty around? What is your recommendation, or what did you contribute to the reasoning there?
Yeah, so I personally did not contribute to the reasoning, but I did contribute to trying to write it up properly. So I kind of know what they did, basically. And what they are still doing, Rob, do interrupt me if you think what you're doing right now is slightly different. But as far as I know, they're trying to implement a bunch of guidelines by the RIVM, basically. So there's different groups of patients, for example, those like the elderly that are kind of more risk groups, so to say. And then there's this checklist of, hey, if your temperature is higher than this, or if you have coughing to some degree, and it's basically just a set of rules based on the measures that you fill in. And that specific set of rules differs a bit for difference with people with different ages or different backgrounds, but we have all of those rule sets available, and they're trying to inform them by all of the RIVM kind of measures that are there. What does happen is effectively that these rules will lead to an actual healthcare practitioner contacting the participant or the respondent in the app. So it's never in a sense, technology only decision. What will happen is that what they're trying to do is technology having effectively supporting the healthcare professionals that are there, just by being able to target a larger group of people. But there will always be some form of communication to then decide whether people should stay in self-quarantine or whether they should go to the hospital.
Thanks, very clear.
Thank you, Jack. Then we go and move on to Sven van Egmond. Hello, Sven. You have the floor.
Good evening. Thanks again for everything, everybody. Yeah, I had a question. If you talk about, I think the previous question of Ege was, they say something about the effectiveness. Regarding the app, is there some kind of patient feedback loop that patients give feedback in terms of how the app helped them in diagnosing or?
Yeah. So right now there's a simple user satisfaction type thing, which I think is not necessarily enough, but it just shows that people are kind of happy with using the app. But actually, in response pretty much to what you're saying in this ongoing discussion, I think yesterday a number of questions were added to the app to actually try to evaluate a bit more what the perceptions of people are that are using it. So to, in a sense, do a survey on top of the actual usage of the app. So this will be available shortly.
All right, are there more questions? Maybe, yes, Ege again, go ahead.
Sorry, so if nobody asks questions, I will do it.
I'm
very
well, we have
curious,
another question, Siep, so, but go ahead.
Yeah.
To Ege or to Siep?
No, Ege, you are on, so
okay,
go ahead.
Maurits, I get the impression that you're working very hard to make this data publicly available, so thanks for that. I'm also getting the impression that with this hindsight or with this ongoing insight, if you would have been involved from the beginning, you might have done things a little bit differently. As you know, I'm involved in a lot of initiatives involving GPs as well. The choice to not have the GP in the design of the app, is that something that you would reconsider at this point? Especially given the discussions about bias of the people using the apps, I think the GPs would be perfectly suited to answer this question.
Yeah, this is admittedly not a choice that I was involved in any way. But yes, so I think, so one of the things that I guess did happen, and I guess this is even like a public discussion right now, how this app relates to the GPs, and whether it's, whether some people maybe are not going to GPs that should because they're using the app, or vice versa. So in a sense, if your question is if there was all the time in the world and I would have been involved in that decision, yes, I would definitely say let's like include that whole healthcare system, of which the GPs are a big part. Now, I would say it's unlikely that that's a role that I would play, but to add to that, like if I would set this up as a scientific study, I would also make a whole lot of different choices. I think it's just right now, the situation is the app was created like in a crisis situation, and we're trying to make the most of it by making sure that the data is available and properly described. And I think that's what we can do.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Then we move on to Siep Windhorst. Go ahead.
Oh, good evening. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much. I was wondering whether the interactions between the call center people and the patients, is that data available as well or not?
It is stored, it is not shared at this point. So in the following sense, the data set, as we're trying to disclose it, contains the fact that there was contact, but not the actual contact, the content of that contact. Because we're trying to anonymize this data, and obviously there's some point to which we can go in that regard.
But you can figure out whether a patient has had 1 or 5 contact moments with the hospital, or is it a Boolean?
No, I think you should be able to technically figure out whether there's multiple flags raised. So this then comes to the question of JAC, and it's actually quite an elaborate scheme of effectively when is some contact initiated, and sometimes the participant might also initiate it. But all of those things that lead to the initiation of a contact would be traceable.
Okay,
very good.
You.
Considering time, I would like to move on because we have at least 3 more questions. So, gentlemen, can I kindly ask you to be short, and also Maurits to ask the same, so that we can listen to all the questions, because I'm sure they are interesting. So the first one then is Huip Hezeman again.
Okay, my question is maybe for you, Maurits, or for Rob. How is the rollout and the scaling up managed? Because I understand that there is a medical back office to answer all questions of all consumers, potentially patients. With the speed and the scale this app is getting, I can imagine it's growing out of hand, and hospitals are just not able to staff these medical back offices.
I can say something about it, but I guess Rob is more
Yeah, shall I do it?
Yeah, so.
There's like seven hospitals now with a contact center, and I think on average now there's like 30 people in the country in total doing all these calls, and I think they're not even. I think that's about it. So it's scalable quite well in that sense, because hospitals have quite a lot of people. And also because a lot of care is not happening at the moment, quite a lot of physicians are available. Not everyone is in the ICU, for example. So for OLVG, for example, we at some point had 50 people in the beginning in our call center. We scaled it down now to like 10 or 12, I think, but we can scale it up quite quickly as well.
All right. Then we have a question from Albert Ali Salah. Albert, go ahead.
I understand that the calls are recorded. Is there a possibility of analyzing the voice of the people calling, either for diagnostics purposes or for measuring some emotional content like anxiety, because this is going to also have some long-lasting anxiety-related effects in the healthcare system. I think the COVID.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure what the content of the phone calls, because so a part of the communication is through messages basically. That content is recorded. Whether the content of the phone call is actually recorded, I don't know. I could check. Right now, I don't think there's any intent to disclose those, but not necessarily like I would say if somebody has a very great idea of what to do with those and how to do this, then we should jointly find a way in which we could manage this, which might not be publicly disclosing them, but still it might be giving some access that is restricted for the sake of a specific project.
Yeah, I was thinking of not the content, but the paralinguistics analysis, just the signal of the
Yeah. Yeah, so I think here the same holds, because then you would have to have some access to it, I guess, to do this, to even do like the pre-processing. But that's definitely something I would be willing to like discuss or vote for if that's if there's plans.
Thank you. Then, given time, we would like to go to the last question before we close the session, and I have a name. It's a person called Fugel or Fugel.
Yeah, that's
Fugel?
okay. It's Fugel.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay then. Go
Hi.
ahead. Hi.
Yeah. So I have a question about anonymization, because anonymization, in my experience, is quite tricky under GDPR. I'm wondering, is there some way for you guys to release what anonymization steps you use, or can you comment on it a little bit? Because I'm thinking things like, are you grouping by age, or removing the age, or removing the outliers? Because I imagine if you have a data set that says somebody of 104 in the area of 's-Hertogenbosch, it would be fairly easy to figure out who that was.
No, so we are definitely grouping by age, and we are not disclosing like the actual age or dates of birth. Same for the location. That's grouped at quite a high level in the standard data set that we're willing to share. Then there's obvious like unique IDs that are also different from the original database IDs. So there's a bunch of these steps that we're trying to do, and all of those have been kind of externally audited. This is one of the main things of kind of why this process was pretty tricky. On the other hand, I do agree with you that full anonymization is something that's extremely hard. And I would love to actually push for having some kind of differential privacy, or adding, in a sense, while this data set keeps growing and if there's more interest for it, to also make sure that effectively there's just some noise added that is controlled, such that even kind of like that there's always a probability that's not one, that you were talking about the wrong or the right person, depending how you would like to look at it. But that's not so well, that's kind of some of the stuff we're doing. I would love to take that even a step further.
Okay, Maurits, thank you very much. Well, given time, ladies and gentlemen, it's almost 8:30, and that means that we are running slightly over time, but we're also close to the end. Well, I think looking back at the past hour, I think that we had a lively discussion with interesting persons providing their insights and sharing them with us. Also good questions, so it was a good overture of this webinar series from JADS, and thank you very much for being with us. It is a great initiative, and we will have the next version of it on May 7th, and so we can announce that already. We do not exactly know yet who the speakers will be, but that will be a surprise, and I'm sure that you will like them. So that for now, let me thank Rob and Maurits again, and all of you who have shared your time, your precious time with us, and stay safe and stay cool. Have a nice evening.